Hey guys, I'm back. To all my listeners out there who have been patiently waiting for my next episode, here it is. I'm sorry it took this long. My schedule has been pretty busy lately. I actually quit my corporate job and started my own business, which has been very exciting, and maybe I'll do an antidote episode soon where I'll talk about starting your own business and getting out of the corporate grind because it's definitely been very freeing. Editing these podcasts takes a long time, and I'm a one-girl show, so it's sort of taken the back burner. I have a lot of stories that I've recorded in the past, and I plan to get those out, so bear with me here. To those of you who have reached out and still haven't heard from me, I apologize, but I will hopefully be getting back in the saddle in these coming months. To those of you stuck in a toxic workplace, I hope you guys are putting yourself first and making the decisions that are going to lead you to a more prosperous and fulfilling life. Thanks for listening and stay tuned.
We moved back to the States from overseas. I was looking for therapy jobs because I was still trying to get my independent license. And I wanted to get the most experience I could as a clinician.
This is Sunny. Sunny is a therapist and military veteran who is excited to take her first job working with civilians. She found a position in a civil commitment center working with sexual predators. As a serious heads up and full disclosure, Sunny's story includes graphic and sexually inappropriate details that may not be suitable for all listeners.
So I interviewed with a substance abuse place, and then I saw another place to interview with, and it did say something about working with sex offenders. And I was like, I've never worked with this population before. It might be a chance for me to grow. I was used to how much I was making overseas. And so when I interviewed at the first place and they didn't offer me that much, I ended up interviewing at that second place, which was working with sex offenders and civil commitment. They offered a lot more than the other place did. It was in the range that I was looking for, so I jumped on it.
Sunny knew that working with this type of clientele was going to be a challenge, but that's exactly what she was looking for, something that would push her as a therapist. What she didn't realize was the toll this place would take on her mental and emotional well-being, pushing her to limits she never thought possible. My name's Carly, and this is Toxic Workplace, a podcast that gives a platform to those who have survived highly toxic work experiences only to come out with newfound wisdom and a renewed sense of self. A toxic workplace is more than just the daily grind. It's a soul-crushing experience that will chip away at your sanity until you're about to lose your mind. It's an abusive relationship that's hard to leave, and the longer you stay, the more you lose sight of who you set out to be.
So I had experience as a therapist, and I was like, let me just give it a try, and I could always leave. Because I was like, I need to do these hard things in order to get experience and be good as a clinician. Going into the interview was really daunting because I didn't know exactly what I was going into. So I had to go through this big gate with barbed wire. And then when you get to the facility, it's another huge facility with barbed wire surrounding the entire place. It looked like a prison. And I was like, do I really want to go in here? Because I'm like, why did I do this to myself? Especially when you hear the door click and lock right as you go through the front door. I think the job description said that you would be working with sex offenders in a facility, but I didn't know exactly what kind of facility it was. So when I finally got there, it was really daunting to see the barbed wire, and then they have to click you into each individual door. So it was a prison. And then you have to go through a metal detector when you go through to make sure that you're not sneaking in any contraband. They also have to lock up your cell phone because that could also be contraband. They're like, no, we don't trust anybody because they've been compromised before. And I was like, okay. I finally meet with the clinical director, and she walks me around the facility, and everyone seems really friendly as you're going through. But you can tell that you have the attention of these men as you're going through the different areas of the facility. All these men that were there, they already served their time, but due to psychological evaluation and the sexual offenses that they committed, they had to go to this place in order to be reformed. And they could be there from anywhere between 8 years to life. because they get evaluated every year to determine whether they've, learned enough to be back in a society. There is an area where they can do outdoor rec. They pass you as they're going to the next place. You'll see like a line of them going along with like one of the guards or something. When you're on the floors, they're able to walk around freely. And they're all saying hi and they're all being friendly. I was nervous because I'm always on guard about things. So like I would always make sure I was right next to somebody when I first got there because I was scared to be alone with anybody or like be anywhere where somebody could hurt me because I didn't know what to expect. So they go over things like if you're going to knock on their door, don't stay in the doorway because they could grab you and then pull you in and close their door and then you're locked in there. It's best not to look into windows or anything because they'll be masturbating to you or something else. Like you'll have to write them up. And I was like, okay, we'll see how it goes. I think one of the first questions she asked in the interview was like, what would you do if a resident takes out his penis during group? And I was like, I don't know. What is the protocol for that? I was like, I guess talk to him about boundaries, like put it away. And it was weird because like, I didn't know that was going to come into play towards the end of my assignment there. I was like, let me keep an open mind. I was like, these people need help. Somebody has to help them. So they made an offer like within a few days. And then the other place made an offer, which is what I was saying. And I ended up taking the higher offer. And I always say in hindsight, I should have just went to the other place, which I ended up working at anyway at the very end. And that was my thought process. I was like, I could put this down and then they would know that I can work anywhere. Like I could work with everybody. During my first week, I was doing a lot of observing and going to the different units that the residents were on and then watching groups. And like one of the things that kept popping up was, you're not going to last a week. And it was from the security guards on duty. They were like, you're not going to last a week. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to last longer than a week. Even the residents, they were like, oh, you're not going to last a month. It's one of those things where somebody tells you you're not going to last. And you're like, no, I'm going to last now. And so there was that sticking in my head that like, oh, I can't leave. Like, I need to prove myself. They threw us into the curriculum of the groups. Like they gave us these workbooks, but these workbooks were made by this woman that shouldn't have written a workbook because it made no sense what we were teaching them in the classes. And the residents were also confused about like what they were trying to get out of these narratives that they were writing or how to write up these forms that we had to review for class. Which is like something that I was noticing when I first got into groups, I think like a month or two in, was that they would get confused a lot about the assignments. And I get frustrated because I'm like, I want to teach something, but I want it to be taught well. Like, where's the lesson here that they're trying to learn? So when I tried to make changes, when we were forced to do single facilitation, I was like, hey, I'm doing it this way. And it seems like they're getting a lot out of it. Can I teach everybody else how to do it this way? Because they are actually learning. And I would get shut down. They were like, no, we've been doing it that way. And I'm like, no, you haven't, because they've been talking about it. Like there's a resident that's teaching another resident outside of class this way that I'm teaching them in class. And it's more effective. And I got dismissed. We were thrown into these groups and it was 2 people facilitating. The place was already understaffed by 5 to 7 clinicians. So during that time, we were doubled up in groups. And then I think 3 months in, they started doing single facilitation. And at that point, I was running groups for 14 hours every week by myself. The security guard would sit outside of the room because of the nature of the information that they were talking about. And that was the thing, too. For these 14 hours, you'd be listening to these men tell you detailed descriptions of their thought process on why they offended and like the steps leading up to the offense and what they were thinking that entire time. You had to put yourself into a different mindset when you were listening to these things. Like because you had to like question some of the things that they were saying or bring up things that are actually written in their documentation. Like you said, this happened, but in your documentation of the crime that was committed, this did not take place. Because they'll paint themselves in a pretty picture of like, oh, this is what happened. Well, no, that's not. And it's supposed to be about accountability. So we had 3 clinicians leave or get fired during the time that I was there. And then my supervisor also left. the director would constantly talk crap about the people that left. Like when she was with everybody, they talked about how a clinician left because they were compromised. And that was the thing that they would always say, compromised. So one of the clinicians had a relationship with one of the residents. And I could see how that could happen to somebody, not myself, because I have strong boundaries, but like I could see how that could happen to somebody who is vulnerable and didn't have a lot of supports. Like they can be charming. And like there was also talk about another clinician that used to be there that ended up marrying a guy after he left, which blew my mind. And that was something that I prided myself on, was boundaries. They would dig for anything they could learn about you. I was never going to mention my daughter. I was never going to mention my husband. I would wear a ring, but I never said anything about being married or anything, because I was like, no, they need as little information about me as possible. And it was frustrating for them. And I never got mad. Like other people would get into these screaming matches with them, you know, these power plays with the residents. But I'm like, I saw them as adults that were emotionally stunted children, you know, argue about things that like children would do that didn't get raised properly. They have bad boundaries and I need to teach them good boundaries. So my first panic attack, I think it was 3 or 4 months in, where there's a secure management unit and you have to check on residents that are on that unit. I had a resident that was on that unit because he was constantly getting in trouble. And I was talking to him through a door, and they're behind these glass doors that are locked. So they can't do anything to you. They have like a flap that'll open. But as I was talking to my resident, there was another resident that was on the unit who was suicidal. So he only had this smock covering him, like this blanket. And this man, mind you, was like, I'm really short. So he was like twice my height, twice my weight. And I'm talking to my resident. He's over there in the window, maybe about a foot away from me. And the next thing I know, I hear the guard saying something like, you know, you're not supposed to do that. And I turn my eyes to the right and I see this man fully butt naked, like masturbating. And I freak out and I say, you can't do that. And I'm like rushing out of the room. I went back to the office and I had a panic attack. Like I was already having an active panic attack, but I knew one of the first things they said to you is that if you don't correct them, you can't write it up. Even saying don't do that is correcting them. So as long as you say something, you can write it up. But had I not said anything and just left, I couldn't write it up. It's weird because you go through that victim blaming thing where you're like, well, I decided to work here, so I knew what to expect. And you hear that from like other people who are like, well, you know, this is what the place is. Like anywhere else, if that happened, like it would be jarring. In my mind, I was trying to rationalize it. Like I rationalize a lot of things. So in my mind, I go, you know, if I don't face this person, I'm going to end up internalizing this. And then that's going to add to like trauma within me. I was like, I need to be able to face them and like set those boundaries. I ended up confronting him and being like, that was disrespectful what you did. Like I kept a straight face. I didn't want him to know that he got under my skin and that he had some power in that situation. And that was the thing too, is I ended up having weekend duty that same week that happened. And I had to check on him and talk to him because he was on suicide watch. There was a lot of them that it was like, how are these people not going back to jail? And I think the rationale is that they knew that these were the type of men that they were going to review their record and they were never going to leave that facility. Like he would probably be one of the residents that dies there, which they don't tell them. Like the men come in there thinking that, oh, I'm just going to be here for a couple years. But the shortest amount of time they are there is like 8 years. I did 14 hours of group. And then I also met with 40 residents each week. And then we also had these care plans that we had to do that took time on top of, you know, checking on people that were suicidal or covering other people's groups. We were told that we would not have to cover other people's groups, that supervisors would cover other people's groups if anybody was out, which ended up being a lie. We still had to cover other people's groups. With all of the tasks that I had to do throughout the day, there was no time at work. So I go home every day to work on notes, monthly notes, or to work on these care plans that we had every week for our residents, going over their progress. I'd work till 5 and then I would get home and I would write notes till 7 or 8 p.m. And if we had weekend duty, it would be 12 days in a row you were working. I would give myself Sundays to rest because I was like, I just can't. I need one day that I don't work on notes. Every time we would get an email telling us that we were so behind on notes, because everybody was always behind, and she would give us the numbers. I think towards the end was when I was really starting to get burnt out. We would get yelled at about our notes not coming in on time. And, people would get written up for being behind on notes. I would always manage not to get written up. We were salary, so we couldn't even complain. The clinicians that had been there for years, they were used to doing this. They were used to taking stuff home. They didn't have families. They set this precedence where it's like, oh, you didn't get your notes done, but they got their notes done. Why can't you? So it set this expectation, which was infuriating because it's like, you guys are just feeding into this thought process that everyone's able to do this.
When you're constantly on the clock, your body and mind don't get the chance to recover. It's like running a marathon on an empty tank. Eventually, you're going to hit a wall. What makes this issue worse is when toxic culture is normalized by long-term employees who agree to work themselves to the ground without a second thought. They wear their 60-hour work weeks like a badge of honor, and while their dedication might seem commendable at first glance, it perpetuates an unrealistic and unhealthy expectation for everyone else. When these employees accept the grind, it reinforces the idea that if you don't, you're not committed or hardworking enough. That kind of pressure can feel suffocating. Here's the thing, work shouldn't feel like survival mode. It's okay to take a break after you've been putting in long hours. In fact, it's necessary. Taking time to rest and recharge isn't just good for you, it's good for your work. When you're rested, you're sharper and more engaged, and frankly, companies that don't prioritize their employees' well-being will eventually pay the price, whether it's high turnover, low morale, or poor performance amongst their employees, which was definitely the case at this organization. Sunny faced challenges setting boundaries with her supervisors regarding working outside of normal hours, which added stress to her role. However, she excelled at maintaining firm boundaries with the inmates she worked with. Her ability to establish clear limits earned her more challenging cases.
I was so good at setting boundaries that my entire caseload was all the narcissists and all the psychopaths. I always make this joke that like the one guy that was on my caseload was the one that they would always say compromised everybody. They were like, oh, he's known for compromising people. You need to be careful with him. They're charming and stuff like that when they talk. With him, it was like he would speak in circles and like he would use big words that he thought sounded good. But like if you really listen to them, you were like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like he's using those words in the wrong way. There was like no substance in anything they were saying, but they were using big words to make themselves sound smarter. With a narcissist, they love hearing themselves talk. So I would let him talk. He would build rapport with himself by talking. And when you listen to people talk, you can pick up on the inaccuracies and then be like, well, earlier you just said this, though. Even though you're saying that you didn't do this, you actually incriminated yourself saying this. I learned how to talk to them in a way that like they thought that I was listening to them and they felt heard. But at the same time, I was getting all the information I needed to. And that's the thing, too, is that like you can't go in there and treat people like garbage because you're alone with these people. So if somebody does something, you want them to not hurt you. I had no time for anything at home. I was so tired all the time. I was like, I just want to sleep. I just want to rest. I think I would cook and then like I would just veg out on the couch all day. Like I didn't have any brain power for anything else. And I was like, this is fine because I'm getting paid and I need to get through these hours so I can get my independent license. And that was my thing. Once I get all the hours, I don't ever have to work here ever again. I think I needed about a year or like 16 months or something like that. I was like, I'm going to stay here long enough to get all my hours and then I'll be done. And of course, that didn't work out. Once it started getting to the 14-hour groups and then doing all these care plans all the time and everything, like I thought I was starting to get into a groove. And then during group, one of the residents pulls out his penis and I'm still teaching group and I see it. And for some reason, I go in my head, okay, can you put your penis back in your pants? And he said, what? And I was like, can you put your penis back into your pants? And he puts it away. All the residents in the group are looking at him and I continue the lesson for the next hour. Like nothing happened until we have break so that I can type up the incident report. So then I type up the incident report on the break and they remove him from class. They were like, why didn't you just get us earlier? And in my mind, I was like, I wanted to get through the lesson and I didn't want this person to see me upset. And when I talked to the director about it, she was like, yeah, so like you should process this with a group. when you see them next. I was thinking, yeah, that's what I need to do. I need to process it with the group next. And when I processed it with the group, it was processing it for 3.5 hours, 2 days later. So they all processed it. And then it ended up turning into like how it was about me, like why he was doing it. He was like, oh, it's because I was thinking I was sexually attracted to her. And they were like, oh, you were wearing those pants that day. Another clinician was in the room observing, and that resident was touching himself, she said, during the processing session, like through his pants. I'm like, this is unreal. And I wasn't picking up on how much that was affecting me until I had another group that same day, and I started getting these stomach aches. And I was like, did I eat something bad? Something is not doing well in my stomach. Like every time I got into group, I would get the worst stomach aches of my life. And that's something that you learn. I don't know why I wasn't picking up on it. I was starting to like write down these symptoms I was having. I was like stomach aches. I feel nauseous, tired, exhausted. I can't focus. And my work was not doing well. Like I couldn't focus on notes. I would dread going into work too. I was like, why do I feel so heavy? I wasn't processing the fact that like I just had this sexual offense happen against me. And then I had to process it with the person who did it. And you would never have that happen in like regular society. You would never have the victim processing it with a group of people telling you how this person felt and victim blaming. Other people were like, all he did was pull out his penis. Like, and I was like, it's not even about that. I was like, it's more psychological than that. Like the power play in his mind too. During that same week, I had this care plan and I wasn't feeling well. I was having bathroom symptoms. I was not feeling well. And I was like, can I reschedule this? Because I don't feel good. Right after I sent this message to the director, she sends out this mass email to everybody that says, if you keep postponing these care plans, you're going to have to cover your supervisor's group. Like if you can't get these in on time. So she was threatening us with more work for not being able to finish our work.
Sunny's experience is a clear example of a serious breach of therapeutic principles. Having her process her trauma in a group of sexual abusers wasn't just unethical, it was harmful and completely inappropriate. It put her in an unsafe environment where victim-blaming comments only deepened her distress. In a field like this, workplaces need to be trauma-informed, especially when it comes to supporting their own staff. Supervisors should know better and make it a priority to handle personal disclosures with care. This kind of work is tough enough, and without proper support systems like access to private therapy, it's impossible to maintain healthy boundaries or truly care for those you're trying to help. Without these safeguards, workplaces risk perpetuating harm to their staff, undermining the very mission of therapeutic care. This lack of support and understanding wasn't just limited to how Sunny's trauma was handled, it was part of a larger pattern. Time and time again, when she tried to make suggestions to improve the environment or advocate for better practices, her voice was dismissed, leaving her feeling unheard and undervalued.
There wasn't any push to make changes. I would talk about things that we could do to make things better, but it was like it fell on deaf ears every time. I had a coworker that I thought I trusted. He would always say things like, I got to put me first, was one of his famous lines. Because we were such good friends. He's always saying, I got to put me first. Like, I am drowning right now. I was thinking about leaving. And especially when she sent out that email, I was like, I am feeling terrible. I am crying going into work. I need to talk to my supervisor and tell her that I am planning on quitting. And at this point, like I also signed up for a therapist, but the wait list was 5 months. So I had to wait 5 months to get into therapy. And I knew it wasn't going to be like something that could be resolved in 3 sessions. At that point, I talked to my supervisor. I was like, I'm planning on leaving. I'm putting in my 4 weeks notice. And she said, okay. I was like, I have 11 days. I haven't taken any leave the entire time I've been here. But my worry is that I'm not going to be able to use my leave. And I really want to use my leave. I was like, so am I going to be able to use this if I leave? And she's like, yeah, but you need to put in that 4 weeks notice. And the moment I put in that 4 weeks notice, she talks to me again. She's like, okay, since you put that in, all your leave is gone. You forfeited it. And I said, are you kidding me? I was about to use it. She's like, you can't because you put in that 4 weeks notice. And I was like, had I known that I was going to forfeit it, I wouldn't have put it in. And she was like, the only thing we can allow you is 1 day. And I was like, so what happened to my leave? Am I going to get paid out when I leave? And she's like, no, you don't get paid out. And I was devastated. So that I found out later was a lie. They did pay me out because they had to, and I didn't know that. So I thought that all my leave was forfeited and I don't even get that money from my leave. But at the time, I was like, what? Because I also had it planned out the days I was going to take leave, and then I had to change it to 1 day. So I changed it to that 1 day. And I was going through the motions, and then, stomach aches happening over and over again during work and feeling exhausted and crying when I was going into work. I was like, what is happening to me? Like, I think at some point it dawned on me that, like, oh, my body's shutting down because I'm not listening to it. Like, when you're so traumatized, your body's like, if you're not going to listen to me and like leave this place, I'm going to make you listen to me, which you don't realize, like, oh, everything's connected to the brain. And I think during that last week, I was giving everybody the information on my residence. I was making sure everything was handed over. And that wasn't even the last week. I think I had 2 weeks left. I was trying to cover my bases, tell everybody I was leaving because I didn't want them to just not see me 1 day and then like their progress to go backwards. But I was also behind on all of my work, and I was still working every hour I could, but I didn't work that weekend that I had my 1 day of leave. I was like, I'm not going to work. I took leave this day. I am not going to work on anything. This is the only day I have. And my supervisor messages me, and I think I have weekend duty that following week too. She messages me and she's like, where are all these notes? It looks like you haven't worked on anything. Are you going to finish them by the end of the day? And I was like, 98 notes? How would I finish 98 notes by the end of the day? Like, I'm going to finish what I can. And she said, well, it looks like you haven't been working on anything at all. And I said, no, I've been working on everything that I can. I don't have any free time. And she goes, well, you had that day of leave. You could have worked on your notes then. And at that point, I was like, I had a panic attack because I was like, me not doing anything. If I was not doing anything at work, I would not be this tired. I went into work crying that day too. And like the guard was like, are you okay? Anything could have made me start crying at work that day. And I was still doing groups like normal. Like, they should have been preparing me to be done. And I get that email. I have my panic attack and I was like, I'm done. Like, my coworkers were trying to like console me. I was like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. But I was just burnt out. I was done. That's the thing that I say too. It was like, it wasn't even the residents that got to me. It was like the lack of support from leadership there. Because I think if the leadership was good and there was that work-life balance, I don't think it would have been so bad. And then if you have no work-life balance and then you're spending all your time there, like, I wasn't vulnerable like other people. My home life was great, but other people who are like going through there don't have a home life, are spending all their time there. Like, they're going to get compromised by somebody who gives them attention. If they're spending all their time there, I was like, there's not enough protection here. And I stopped feeling safe. I was like, I'm done. And I wrote up my letter. My one coworker, she encouraged me to write up my resignation letter before I left, that I was leaving immediately. So I did. And I was like, I am a symptom of a bigger problem. If good clinicians leave, that means that there's something wrong with how things are being run. Good clinicians don't leave good jobs. And that was the thing. I was like, these people work really hard, harder than you would expect them to. I was like, if nothing changes, this is going to continue. You'll continue to have these people leave. My FU was also this condolences card that I left. So before I left, I put the card in my desk. And I think I was like going to do it as a joke to begin with. But then when I was pissed off, it was like perfect. It was like a good fuck you. I put this card in my desk. It says, to honor and remember, as you mourn this loss, know that others mourn with you too. Sincerely, Sunny. I put it in my desk at work because I knew that the director always goes through everybody's desk when they leave. So I knew that she would see it. That was the funny thing too, is that when I left, I like asked what happened after I left before I had a falling out with my old coworker. And they were saying that the director was like, had a meeting with all the clinicians, and she was like, do you feel like you're not being heard at work? Or do you feel like you're about to leave? Blah, blah, blah. Like, trying to cover her ass. And like, nobody would say anything about anything that was wrong because that's already the environment anyway. I left the card in my desk, and then I typed up the resignation letter and walked directly to HR and put it on her desk. And I was like, I'm leaving. I'm done. Here's my badge. I have nothing from this facility. I took all my stuff out because I was already taking all my stuff out of my desk in the weeks prior because I was like, I don't want anything that is mine left. And then I had to be called out of the facility because I didn't have a badge to get outside, and your badge helps you leave the facility too. It felt liberating. It felt like I was finally leaving prison. Like I was one of the inmates there. And I thought everything was okay because I had lined up another job and, I was going to work there in, I think, the week after. And I thought everything was okay. And then I got a letter in the mail saying that I was reported to the board, like the ethical board, that like I left notes unfinished. And the thing is, like, I don't know if it was them or if it was my coworker who kept telling me, you got to put yourself, or I got to put myself first. And that was the thing where I was like, oh, I need to trust people when they tell me who they are. Because what he meant was he has to put himself first. But if I put myself first, like, that's a problem. So it was 28 pages that I wrote. I also screenshotted that message that my supervisor told me about, doing work on my day of leave because I was like, I'm going to need this. So I screenshotted it and emailed it to me. And I wrote this 28-page paper, and it took a long time for me to get through it. I got a lawyer because I was like, I want to cover my ass just in case, because I love doing therapy and this is something that I am good at. I detailed what I did every single hour, my weekly schedule. There was an appendix in there of like what each section of that 28-page paper goes over, all the reasons why my notes were late. It talked about other people's notes being late, the fact that I had no write-ups at work to even say that I was negligent, and like that it wasn't for lack of trying that I was writing these notes, that it was like all these other factors, like being traumatized, not being able to get into therapy, not having good supervision at work. The board, they said there was no support for the claim, that it was thrown out. And I ended up framing that and putting it in like this gold frame, just justifying that like my feelings were valid. And the thing was, like, it was so isolating when I left there because none of my coworkers would talk to me afterwards. And I was like, am I the crazy one? And that was something that I had to process in therapy 5 months later with like one of the best therapists I'd ever seen. After you leave a place like that, you're not used to the quiet of other places, and you're also on edge and you're questioning your abilities as a clinician. You're like, am I even good at therapy? Am I going to end up leaving a place and end up getting reported again for not doing my notes? And that was the thing too, is that the last 2 jobs that I left, I ended up being the only clinician to finish out the job, terminating all their work, finishing all their notes before they left. Like, they were like, everybody always leaves notes unfinished, but I didn't.
Sunny's experience left her second-guessing her abilities and questioning whether she was truly cut out for her chosen field. It's a feeling many of us can relate to when we're stuck in an environment that undermines rather than supports us. But what's inspiring is how she was able to regain her confidence and find clarity after leaving that toxic workplace. By moving to a healthier environment where she was valued and supported, she not only rediscovered her passion, but also proved to herself that she's more than capable in her profession. I asked Sunny to share what she learned from this experience.
I think one of the biggest things I learned is that, like, I don't owe any company anything. If I start feeling burnt out or like feeling like I'm getting to that point where I'm crying when I go into work, like, this job, I need to leave. If there are bad reviews on a job on Indeed, that is a red flag. I think like after I got the job, they were talking about the reviews and I ended up looking at them and I was like, oh, they're just disgruntled. That was one of the things. And then, always believing somebody when they tell you who they are, like, even if it's joking, like, people tell you exactly who they are as people, and what kind of supervision I'm not going to put up with. It was like, I left the job and I was like, I'll take less pay for mental well-being. If you listen to your body when it tells you that you're not feeling well, like, your body has a way of telling you that you need to leave. And if you don't listen, it'll make you. Just trust your gut. I'm finally independently licensed. I'm getting paid way more than I was getting paid before. I'm finally getting paid like a livable wage. But I'm really thankful to be able to tell my story. It feels like therapeutic in a way to like finally be like, you know, this happened to me and it was real.
Sunny's story highlights the critical need for trauma-informed care, not just for clients, but for the professionals who serve them. Sunny's courage in sharing her experience sheds light on the importance of ethical leadership, respect for boundaries, and creating safe, supportive environments for those in high-stress fields. It also shows that leaving an unhealthy workplace can be the first step towards healing and rediscovering your strength. If you're dealing with a toxic workplace, remember, you don't have to stay to prove your worth. Pay attention to the red flags, and like Sunny said, listen to your body when it signals distress, and prioritize your well-being by seeking support or making the decision to walk away. You deserve a workplace that respects and values you for who you are and the work that you do. Next time on Toxic Workplace.
I guess at one point they realized that the employee morale was toxic. There was just no morale at any of their workplaces. So they hired some consultants to come and tell them what the problem was. I kind of have sympathy for these consultants. They walk into the situation and they see that the problem is that the management's awful. But you can't say that as a consultant, you know. They tried to like kind of give them the veneer of like good governance, like, well, you know, what if you had a suggestion box, an anonymous suggestion box? Another one was, oh, you should have like, you know, a company business statement and like a company bill of rights. And it's like, those are nice. I mean, I'm not necessarily against any of those things, but when they got their suggestion box, nobody ever used it. I remember one of the VPs complaining about that. Oh, we hired these consultants and then nobody put a suggestion box. Nobody ever uses a suggestion. Of course, nobody's going to use it.
I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you have a story to share, please go to toxicworkplacepodcast.com, click on Be a Guest, and fill out the submission form. Your story will be completely anonymous. All names are changed to protect the employer and the employee. And if you like this podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.